Well, this has been and is an interesting season. You know, stress and worry and anxiety are not new to us. They existed before all of this pandemic, and they will exist after. But certainly what we've been going through has had its roller coaster, right? This global pandemic is a recent development, and it brings its own kind of stress and worry. But anxiety was part of our lives even before this. We've been talking about what does it look like to put anxiety in its place, not just because of what we're going through right now, but because of what we go through all the time. And we've been offering these 4 questions, like 4 sides of a box, that kind of help bring shape to our lives and keep anxiety in its place. We've been doing this with the help of what a follower of Jesus named Paul said. And we find this in the book of Philippians in the Bible. Check this out. It says, "Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all that you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon." So don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Tell God what you need and thank Him for all that He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. His peace will guard our hearts, come around our hearts and our minds as we live in Christ Jesus. And now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable, what's right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Keep putting into practice all that you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. So far, we've covered 3 questions, and you can catch all 3 of those questions on our YouTube channel. And they form something of a foundation for this 4th question we're going to ask today. Real quick, those first questions are, what should we expect? We can expect peace. In a world that expects worry and anxiety to ramp and run high, be right on the edge and the margin, we can expect peace. What are we saying? We're saying prayers, like we're talking to God first, telling Him the truth, saying, God, I need help. And God, I'm grateful for all you've done so far. And God, you are so amazing. Help, thanks, and wow outline our conversations with God. What are we thinking? We look for God and good. When our minds tend to wander to worst case scenarios and what ifs and fears, instead we give them somewhere to go by looking to God and to the good around us. This expectation of peace, these conversations with God and remembering God and the good around set this context for the 4th question, which finally we'll get to is, what do I do? Okay, we found some peace. We've steadied ourselves. We've backed away from the anxiety and the worry, but what do I do? Isn't this when anxiety starts to ramp the most? How many times does anxiety rise up in us right when we're trying to figure out what to do? All kinds of questions enter our lives, right? Like, what school should I go to? What job should I take? When should I retire? Should I get married? Should I buy this? Should I go here or there? How do I give our kids the best chance of success? Homeschool, public school, all kinds of questions to try to sort through. And that's honestly just the usual list. That doesn't even factor in all the unique decisions that we're having to make in our current reality. Like, just a window into me, obviously we have to make choices about our church. How will we know when it's time to gather again? What will that look like? How is the economy going to affect that? How do we support people? How do we be the church in all the different places? How do we support people along the way? All of these things. And what do we do with all of that? As a family, we experience the same thing. We've done this school at home thing now. What does that mean for the fall? When will the school system decide what they're going to do about open or close? What should we do about summer vacation? Should we travel to see family? So many questions. And we got to make choices about what to do. Whether it's this challenge or another one, every season of life holds circumstances that require decision making. So there's always the chance and the opportunity for anxiety. So how do we get in the best position for this constant barrage of decisions in our lives? I think there's 2 things. We're going to talk about them today, right out of what Paul said in Philippians 4. The first one is we need a habit. Now, we've talked, honestly, these last 3 weeks about different habits. We just haven't called them that. We talked about replacing our habit to run to worry and anxiety with a pattern of prayer in our lives, of talking to God first. We've talked about replacing our worst case scenario thinking with thoughts that are focused on God and on the good. And now we need to think about our patterns of behavior, which is what Paul says at the end of this passage we've been looking at over and over. He says, keep putting into practice all that you learned and received from me, everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Keep putting into practice what you saw me doing. These first 4 words are key. Keep putting into practice. To do and to do over and over. Jesus said it really similarly. He said, a fool hears what God says, but then he doesn't do it. A wise man hears what God says and puts it into practice. Listen, having peace in our lives that we are making good and wise decisions comes from developing this pattern, a habit of making good and wise decisions. In fact, as we think about the big decisions that come into our world, and especially stressful times like these, the best preparation for making good decisions about big things in our lives is to make a habit of making good, wise decisions about the daily things in our lives. To not just decide well once, but to keep on practicing. Real change in our lives that are more characterized by peace than anxiety and worry, real change will require real action and ongoing action. Not one-time action, but keep putting into practice. So think about this. How will you shape a pattern for your daily choices? What Paul is saying in here is pretty subtle, but what he's saying is that people are a fundamental part of the way that we make decisions. When talking with the people in Philippi, Paul said this, follow my pattern, right? Keep putting into practice all that you learned and received, he says, from me. This was a person embodying this. Now, when he says learned, he doesn't just mean a knowledge thing. It's not scroll through and read. It's not just an information thing. It's a practice thing. Like standing next to the kitchen island and working through a recipe with a young child, learning by doing. That's what Paul was talking about. And he had done this. He invited the people of Philippi to live alongside him and do with him the things that pointed their life toward God. They learned by doing with someone. And when we notice that, when we pay attention to that, we see exactly how important the personal connection side of this shaping and doing in our lives really is. He uses another word. He says that you received from me. Paul lived for a short time in this place called Philippi, and he offered help to others in following Jesus. And he gave them a pattern, a habit to follow. But they had to choose whether they were going to receive it or not. And the people in Philippi did. They received it. It's kind of an important concept. Have you ever sat in a class or a meeting, whether on Zoom or in person, and realized suddenly that for the last 5 minutes, you know someone has been talking, but you have no idea what they said, right? It was like Charlie Brown's teacher in the background. Or you got to the end of a page of a book, like you scrolled through all the words, or you were getting ready to swipe to the next screen on your reader, but you have no idea what that page said. Things were offered on that page or on that screen. Things were offered as people were speaking, but you didn't receive it. It's really important to receive. The word actually means to take up or take in. It's actually a really great life skill. It's kind of like this, that every exchange, either the thing that we are reading or seeing is offering us something, and we decide to pick it up or not pick it up. As people speak to us, they set something down, and we either receive it or we don't. Imagine just for a second that every input or conversation we have is like a table between us and it. Across the table is the book we're reading or the shows that we're watching or the people that we're talking to or watching or the people who are messaging you. And every word said is offered and placed on the table. Now, I can leave it there and not receive it and take it in, or I can pick it up and receive it, right? Maybe to get really specific, let's just imagine a couple of kids in a conversation, hypothetically, my kids at home, who are not perfectly behaved all the time, and sometimes they'll be in an exchange, and one of them will offer something to the other person, and that thing is not always kind. I just gotta be honest, right? They put some things in front of the other person that are pretty rude, like, I think you're an idiot, right? Okay, well, they've set it down on the table. Now the next child has to decide, am I gonna pick that up or not? If they do, what happens next can be any number of things. If they pick this thing up, what they often do, and this is not unique to children, is that they say, you know what? I've got something similar to offer to you in response. And so they double down with another insult. And so they said, the next kid says, okay, I'll pick that up. And by the way, now that I've picked that up, I will see your insult and I will raise you a projectile thrown in your direction, usually a Lego. And all of a sudden, it escalates back and forth. They receive it, and it causes a behavioral reaction. If instead, the first child, I keep telling them this, they're not doing it. If they would just leave it there, like, does your brother know you're an idiot? No, he doesn't. Then don't receive it. Just leave it on the table. And all of a sudden, Legos aren't flying and words aren't exchanged and no one's in timeout. Here's the thing. In that simple example or any other exchange we could think of, the way we can tell if someone has received something is by how they respond. If they walk away, we can know they left it there. But if they engage and double down, we know that they received it. The same is true for everything Paul offered these people. Did they receive it? It will show up in their behavior. So let's think for just a minute. Consider this question. What does our behavior say about what we are receiving? A lot of times, this is some insider baseball for people if you're just kind of checking church out for the first time. Sometimes people in churches take in and take in and take in. Lots is set on the table, but not a lot is picked up and put into practice. But what Paul is saying is that if we're actually going to develop this habit of living in God's direction, we have to keep putting into practice everything that we have heard and seen. And I want you to notice that Paul is saying, look, you heard it and you saw it because Paul was right there. Notice how close and personal this pattern of life is shared. Paul helped people follow Jesus at a very close distance. And so we could ask this question along the way as we're thinking about our habit. This is a fundamentally important question. Who are my people? You have people. And what you're receiving from them is evidenced in the way that we respond, in the way in which we behave. If we have our life full of people who are consumed by worry and anxiety, who don't have a high degree of trust in God or a way to put anxiety in its place, then we often join right in that, and it's evidenced in our behavior. But instead, we could be surrounding ourselves with different people. This is what Paul said. He said, this is such a foundational question. In fact, let me just ask you, who are your people? Who, like Paul, are you learning from and learning with? Who around you is helping you to keep putting into practice what God is saying? Now, this is what many people around us are loving about Discovery Bible Study. Each conversation gives us a chance to look into what God has said and to receive what he is saying, listening by way of a few very simple questions. And each time we make commitments together to obey, to receive, to pick up, and to put into action or do what we are hearing. And we support each other along the way as we're doing those, because we were never intended to do it alone. We obey, we follow God better together. We hear from him better, and we follow better together. This pattern is developed over time, and it helps us become people who are ready to make great choices with God. And this pattern of gathering together to support and challenge one another, it surrounds us with people. They don't have to be the expert or always have the answer, but instead we can think of one another as fellow travelers, right? People to encourage us, sounding boards to listen to us and cheer us on, listen to God with us. We invite God along with them to lead each of us, all of us, and the people around us to support and encourage us as we keep putting into practice what God is saying. We all need these kind of people. And we need this kind of pattern to be great decision makers. In fact, take just a minute and kind of look around, take kind of a mental tour around your life. Who in your life can you invite to listen to God with you and to keep putting into practice with you? If you're looking for perfect people, you won't find them. And so maybe consider beginning with your family, with your neighbors, with your friends. Maybe something like Discovery Bible Study could help shape some good conversations, and we can write some I will statements to do in God's direction what he's inviting us to do. Look around. Who do you have? Just gather them up and bring meaning into those relationships by pointing yourselves in Jesus' direction. If you're not sure how to get started, or you know what, if for some of you find yourself kind of isolated, you don't have people that come to mind right away, maybe we could help. We've been saying this over and over. We'd love for some people to come alongside you. So if you really need some help figuring this out or finding people, just text "What's Next" to 94090. And really quickly, you'll be connected with some great people and some opportunities to connect with others and head off in Jesus' direction together. As we become the kind of person by doing regularly what God says, we can have, get this, more and more confidence and more peace that whatever we decide about all those million decisions we have to make, we can be confident and have peace that because we've done it with God's help and with God's people, it's going to be good. That we can handle whatever comes after that because God's going with us and so are God's people. We can have greater confidence and peace in our decisions. And so we keep putting into practice all that we learn and receive from God, everything we have heard and seen those following God doing, because then the God of peace will be with us. Now, I know you still have a list of decisions to make, right? And so I bet you still have a few yabbits. Yeah, but when do I open my business? Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but when do I go back to work? Yeah, but what do I do about this house? Yeah, but what do I do about him? What do I do about her? Yeah, but what do I do about them or me? We all have our yabbits. I learned about yabbits from Mr. Lowry, my 8th grade science teacher. Side note, I also learned the necessary distance from a person when they have terrible coffee breath. I may have learned some science along the way, I'm not sure. But he would always say, there's always more yabbits. And he's right. There will always be more. But developing this habit, this pattern of expecting peace, instead of running to stress, talking to God, thinking about God and the good instead of the worst case scenario, and actively doing what we learn from God. These things help us become the kind of people who can make big decisions without big anxiety. I know that often the stakes are high, and so maybe we need one more reminder. These habits can help us build confidence, right? But to really have peace, we also need an answer to this question we always end up asking. What if I get it wrong? When decisions have big consequences, or even if they seem to, fear quickly follows, paving the way for stress and anxiety and worry to rush into our lives in mass quantity. How do you have peace in the midst of that? Well, this is where we need not only habits, but we need perspective. And this is the beauty of following God, that he invites us into a much bigger perspective. God's Spirit in us reminds us what is true, and he gives us peace and confidence that no matter the circumstance around us, he's not shaken. He's not worried. He is for us, and he is not stopped by our decisions, good or bad. He doesn't need perfect decisions from us to lead us. Remember, Paul said this, remember, the Lord is at hand. God is near, and he is up to something, and that's great news because God is good. This same letter that Paul wrote to the church in Philippi had some great reminders about this God who is with us. He says, God who began the good work within you, this one who's shaping us, who has rescued us, who put his Spirit in us, he will continue his work until he is finally finished on the day when Jesus Christ returns. He will keep going. If we're not dead, he's not done. He goes on in Philippians chapter 2, he says this, for God is working in you. He's working, ing, in progress, on the way, giving us the desire and the power to do what pleases him. So when we call out to God, when we expect peace, when we fix our eyes on Him and on the good, and when we try to practice what it is that He's calling us to, we can have confidence that He is pointing us in the right direction. We don't make decisions alone when we follow God. And even if we get it wrong, we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to His purpose for them. When we live in God's direction, everything can be worked for good by God because He's strong. Everything? Yep. Everything. And so let's ask deeply within ourselves, is the God we follow strong enough to lead us into good decisions? Yep. Is the God we follow strong enough to lead us, even if our decisions are 1 degree off of perfect? Probably, right? Yeah? 10 degrees? He's probably that strong. What about 180 degrees? Yep. And so we can have peace. We can rest. We don't need to freak out. Anxiety doesn't need to wreck us. We can put it in its place because the God we follow is strong. We can keep it simple. We can expect peace from God. We can talk to God. We can fix our thoughts on God, and we can pattern our lives together after Him with people doing the same thing, all the while keeping the perspective that God can and will lead us well, no matter the choice, no matter the outcome. We can trust Him. And we remember this because even when we were a total disaster, headed the wrong direction, ignorant of anything God had called us into, that's when Jesus came and rescued us. But God has always been for us and after us and with us, and He desires to be in our lives. And so all of us who have pointed our lives in Jesus' direction celebrate in communion the truth that God is strong enough to lead us even when we don't know that we need it. He is strong enough to lead us even when we have made mistakes, that our brokenness and our failures do not separate us from Him. They were paid for long before we knew we needed it. And so we celebrate and we rest and we find peace. And if you've never celebrated this rescue, if you've never found peace in this, if you've never rested in the truth that God is for you, today's the day. So God, I want to live with You. I want to point my life in Your direction. Simply say yes and join us all in this celebration as we take a little piece of bread and cup of juice or whatever you've put together to remember that Jesus rescued us. He's with us. He's for us. And He works for good in everything. Let's take communion together.